Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. Chapter 1. I was born in 1632 in the city of York. My father was an immigrant from Bremen. He settled first at Hull. He bought a good estate by merchandise, and then he began to live in York. There he started creating his desired life, marrying my mother, daughter of the richest family named Robinson, and from whom I was named Robinson Crusoe. But in time I was called Crusoe. I was the third son of the family, having two elder brothers, one of whom was in Flanders. He was a lieutenant colonel to an English regiment commanded by Colonel Lockhart, but he was killed in a battle by Dunkirk against Spaniards. As for my second brother, I never knew what happened to him. Our fates were the same. Our parents never learned anything about us. My father prepared me for the law, but I would be satisfied with nothing but going to sea. He foresaw my journey in a desire, so one day he called me to his chamber, telling me that this adventure wouldn't be so beneficial for me, and that I had the power to disrupt my life or exalt my life. He told me that the journey desire was for men of desperate fortunes, and also for men of superior fortunes, but I was in the middle, and the people in the middle always had the fewest disasters of life. He told me I was under no necessity of seeking my bread. He would do anything for me if I would stay and settle at home. Then he reminded me of my brother. He wanted to keep my brother from joining the army, but he couldn't, and he was killed in the war. I saw tears running down his face. He told me his heart was so full he could say no more to me. At the end of this intense speech, I was truly affected by my father's words. I decided not to think about going abroad any more. But the effects of his warning wore off in a few days. When I was in Hull, by chance, I heard that my friend was preparing his father's ship to sail to London. Leaving my parents without informing them, I got on the ship on the first day of September, 1651. Tragicomically, the sayings of my father began to come true. Not before long, after leaving Humber, the wind began to blow violently and the waves rose. I was terrified. I expected that every wave would swallow us up, and that every time the ship fell, as I thought it did, into the hollow of the sea, we should never raise again. The only thought on my mind was to be back at home as soon as possible. I would go directly home and never run into such miseries any more. On our 6th day of being at sea, we came into Yarmouth Roads. We stayed there for 7 days, but the next day the wind increased. It was a terrible storm. I saw the terror and amazement in the faces of the seamen. The sea went mountains high and broke upon us every 3 or 4 minutes. The storm continued with such fury that the seamen themselves acknowledged they had never seen the worse. We had a good ship, but she was deep laden and wallowed in the sea, so that the seamen every now and then cried out. She would flounder. It was my advantage that I did not know what they meant by flounder till I asked. In the middle of the night, one of the men cried out that we had sprung a leak. Another said that there was 4 feet of water in the hole. The master ordered us to fire a gun as a signal of distress. Our ship ventured a boat out to help us. Not much more than a quarter of an hour later, we saw our ship sink, and then I understood for the first time what was meant by a ship floundering in the sea. After many troubles, we were able to get to the coast safely. Then we went to Yarmouth on foot. The local people showed us mercy, and they gave us enough money to go to London or back to Hull. I wish I had gone home. I do not know what to call this, but my ill fate pushed me on, and it was impossible for me to escape. I saw the captain after a few days. "Young men," he said, "you must never go to sea again. You must take this as a sign that you are not to be a seafaring man. If you do not go back, wherever you go, you will meet with nothing but disasters and disappointments." He went away, and I never saw him again. What happened to him where he went, I don't know anything about. I traveled to London by land. I had many struggles with myself as to whether I should go home or go back to sea. I was ashamed to go home. I should be laughed at among the neighbors. Since then, I have observed that when you are young, you are not ashamed of sins, but are ashamed of regrets. Not ashamed of the action, but are ashamed of the returning. I was uncertain what kind of a life to lead, but then I looked out for a voyage. Chapter 2. Firstly, my fortune was with me. I was able to find good friends in London. I met a captain who had been on the coast of Guinea, and who, having had very good success there, was determined to go again. He told me if I would go on the voyage with him, I should be at no expense. I accepted his offer. As the captain directed, I bought some toys and trifles to sell in Guinea. This was the only voyage which I may say was successful among all my voyages. I enriched my communication and gained money as well. With the captain's great experience, I gathered information about navigation. This voyage made me both a sailor and a merchant, for I brought home 5 pounds 9 ounces of gold dust, from which I earned almost 300 pounds in London. This money filled me with those aspiring thoughts again. But the death of the captain brought me down. The ship would go to Guinea again. This time we were faced with all sorts of disasters. Initially we were sailing toward the Canary Islands. Between these islands and the African coasts, at the time of twilight in the morning, we were assaulted of a ship of Turkish pirates. We were prepared to fight with our 12 guns. However, as our ship was disabled, 3 of our men died, and 8 were wounded. We were obliged to yield. They took all of us to the harbor of Salé, belonging to Moors. The head of the pirates accepted me into his service, so I went down from trade to slavery. Painfully, I remembered the words of my father speaking like a prophet. You will be extremely poor. No one will be able to save you. All of this became a reality. My new master took me to his home. He generally went to the sea, leaving me on land to do some work in the house. And when he came home, he ordered me to lie in the cabin to look after the ship. I meditated on nothing but escape for 2 years. Yet I couldn't put my thoughts into practice. My patron had a big boat. He ordered the carpenter of his ship, who was also an English slave, to build a cabin in the middle of his boat. Also, he admonished him to make a place which would be used for the rudder, casting the anchor. We went out frequently with this boat for fishing. He always took me and a slave with him to row the boat. I was so exceptionally skilled at fishing that he didn't want to go fishing without me. I began to make plans to escape from there. Whatever would happen, my aim was to escape. One day my patron ordered me, with one of his men and a young slave, as usual, to go out with the boat and catch him some fish. He commanded that as soon as I got some fish, I should bring it to his house. Now I found I was likely to have a little ship at my command. I prepared myself not for fishing, but for a voyage. My first work was to deceive the Moor. He was called Moli. I asked him if we could bring some gunpowder, and said maybe we would hunt a few birds for ourselves. He believed me. I also asked him to bring some food and water. So we left the port with all our needs met. Though we hunted for a long time, we had nothing in our hands. I told him we should go further. He accepted. All of a sudden I grasped him with my arm and threw him into the sea. I took one of the rifles and called, "If you come closer, I'll kill you! I am very determined to achieve my freedom." He knew how to swim very well, so there was no doubt he would reach the coast. I turned to the slave. His name was Suri. "If you are faithful to me, I will be with you." The boy smiled and swore to be faithful. I made such time that I believe by the next day, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when I first made for land, I could not have been less than 150 miles south of Salé, quite beyond the Emperor of Morocco's dominions. We saw no people. I was taking course about 150 miles south of the Salé port. The wind was carrying on, blowing tranquilly. I sailed in that manner for 5 days. I came to anchor in the mouth of a little river. I didn't know where we were. The only thing I wanted was fresh water. Suri went on shore to find water. He found water and killed a hare. We ate it and rested. Anyway, after this adventure, we sailed for 12 days. During this time, we were constantly passing different islands, but we were afraid to land. We continued about 10 days and met an island which was inhabited by black people. Nonetheless, they appeared fearful to us, and we were the same to them. In any case, we understood each other with gestures, signs. They brought us meat and wheat. Then we continued for approximately 11 days. One day while sitting in the cabin, I was jolted by Suri's scream. "Master, master, a ship!" He supposed it was his real master's ship sailing to find us. I jumped out of the cabin and immediately saw that it was a Portuguese ship. They saw us and took us to the ship. Fortunately, the captain helped us in such a way that I couldn't pay back. We came to the Bay de Todos Los Santos in Brazil. The captain wanted to buy my boat. I sold it to him. He also offered money for Surrey. With Surrey's permission, I accepted his offer. He gave me some money to live on and form a settled life there. I began to put everything in order in my life. I learned how to plant sugarcane and make sugar. I've stayed there for 4 years. I earned a lot of money. I had a life which my father advised me, but I was far away from my dreams, and I wasn't at sea, but on an island. I had told my friends my trading days in Guinea. They listened to me very attentively, but they were especially interested in buying Negroes, which was a trade at the time. One day they told me that they had a mind to fit out a ship to go to Guinea, and I decided to begin to merchandise black people. I set off again with the ship, which was prepared by the island people and the crew from there. Unfortunately, this was a cursed journey too. I went on board on the 1st of September, 1659, being the same day 8 years ago that I went away from my father and mother at Hull. From that moment there was a terrible storm, but it was impossible to resist the waves. The words were not enough to describe the situation. We knew nothing where we were, or upon what land it was we were driven. Without hope, we tried to get in the rowboat. We all saw that the sea went so high that the boat could not live, and that we should be inevitably drowned. A wave, like a mountain, came and overset the boat at once, separating us from the boat and from one another. We were all swallowed up. Though I swam very well, I could not deliver myself from the waves, but then a wave carried me toward the shore. I got upon my feet and attempted to go toward the land as fast as I could. I was now landed and safe on shore, and began to look up and thank God that my life was saved. I was wet and had no clothes. I had no weapon. In a word, I had nothing with me but a knife, a tobacco pipe, and a little tobacco in a box. There was no prospect of life. I walked from the shore to find fresh water. Luckily I found water. I got a little tobacco into my mouth to prevent hunger. Then I climbed a tree and I fell asleep. Chapter 3. When I woke up, the weather was clearer, the storm ceased. I was surprised to see that the ship had been removed by storm at night, and it had been drafted to a rocky place in the water. I had to reach the ship to find necessary things for me. When I came down from my apartment in the tree, I looked about me again, and the first thing I found was the boat, which lay upon the land. I walked as far as I could go, near the boat, but I couldn't because there was an inlet of water between me and the boat. Then I swam to the ship. I found food and rum. The food was not wet. I ate some biscuits and drank rum. I needed a boat to transport all of those to the island. Then, clever I was, I threw the woods to the sea and bound them not to be caught in the current. I put 4 oars side by side and bound them also, and I managed to make a raft. I filled my raft with food, bread, rice, and cheese, and brought them to the shore. Now I had to discover a place to live and carry the things I brought from the ship. While I strolled around, I perceived that it was an island. To protect myself, I made shelter between the boxes, because I knew the ship would sink at first occasion. I had to carry the other things: sacks of nails, carpenter's chest, 1 rifle, 2 pistols, some gunpowder, man clothes, a hammock, and bed sheets. Every day, at low water, I went on board and brought away what I could get. I should have brought away the whole ship, piece by piece. By preparing the 12th time to go on board, I found the wind began to rise. However, at low water I went on board and discovered a locker with drawers in it. I found 2 or 3 razors, 1 pair of large scissors, knives, forks, and some money. I smiled to myself at the sight of this money. "You are not worth it to me," I said. "One of those knives is worth all the money." However, I took it away. The weather turned to a violent storm, but I had got home to my little tent. It blew very hard all night, and in the morning when I looked up, no more ships were to be seen. Now I had to protect myself in a place safer than my tent. Eventually I found a plain on a hill. There was a cave there. I made a fence near the cave at first and carried my food there. Then I made a large tent to preserve myself from the rain. I struggled too much, but it became just as I wanted. After I had been there about 10 or 12 days, I thought that I should lose my reckoning of time. To prevent this, I wrote on wood with my knife. I came on shore here on the 30th of September, 1659. I made a great cross and I set it up on the shore where I first landed. I also cut every day a notch with my knife, so I kept my calendar. I had brought pens, ink, and paper, 3 or 4 compasses, some books from the ship, and I must not forget that we had a dog and 2 cats in the ship. The dog had jumped out of the ship and swam on shore to me. He was a trusty servant for me for many years. The pens, the ink, and the paper were very useful for me. While my ink lasted, I kept things very exact, but after that was gone I could not, for I could not make any ink. In any miserable condition, there is something negative and something positive to be thankful for. We may always find something to comfort ourselves, even in a miserable condition. So I left looking out to see a ship. I began to arrange my way of living, and to make things as easy as I could. I set myself to enlarge my cave, and then I began to make some necessary things, such as a chair and a table. Without these, I could not write or eat, or do several things with so much pleasure. So I went to work. I had never handled a tool in my life, and yet in time I learned how to do them by working hard, and I made a table and a chair. Then I began to write a diary. September 30, 1659. I, poor miserable Robinson, began to live on the island of despair, as I had named, all the rest of the ship's company being drowned, and myself almost dead. All day I thought about my hopeless state. At night I slept on a tree because I was scared of the wild creatures. October 1st. The following morning, seeing the ship floating as a result of the water rising was amazing. I was also sorry again to have lost my friends. I swam to the board. This day it continued raining. October 1st through the 24th. I spent all these days carrying all the necessary things from the ship by a raft. October 25th. It rained all day and night. I spent the day covering and securing the goods because of the rain. Meanwhile, the ship was broken into pieces. October 26th. Wandering the entire coast, I searched for a safe place to set my home up. I found a proper place. October 26th through the 30th. I worked extremely hard and carried all my goods to my new place. October 31st through November 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. Taking my gun, with the aim of finding food and discovering around, I went out into the island, and I hunted a she-goat. Then I set up my tent in front of a rocky place. I hunted 2 birds resembling a duck, which were very delicious. In the afternoon I went to work to make a table. November 4th. Since this morning I started a regular life. I began to order my time of work, time of going out with my gun, the time of sleep. November 5th, 6th. Together with my rifle and my dog, I hunted a wild cat whose fur was soft but meat was not edible. I persisted in making the table and completed it. However, it was not in the shape I had desired. November 7th through 12th. I spent all of my time making chairs. I changed its form. November 13th. It rained and rained all day. There was a terrible thunder and lightning. I was frightened because of my gunpowder. As soon as it was over, I decided to separate my stock of powder into as many little parcels as possible, so that it might not be in danger. November 14th through the 17th. I spent these days in making small boxes to protect the gunpowder. November 18th. While wandering around, I found a tree which was named an iron tree in Brazil. I pulled some away by force from this, though material, and succeeded in making a shovel. November 23rd. I tried to enlarge and deepen the cave for 18 days. There was an appropriate place to take care of my food. December 10th through 20th. I supposed to have completed my cave, but some soil was poured out from the hill. It became vital to strengthen the ceiling. Until December 20th, I made the shelves and nailed the poles and carried all the things to my cave. December 24th through 25th. It rained and rained. I stayed in. December 27th. I killed a young goat and lamed another. I caught it and took it home. I took such care of it that it lived. This was the first time that I thought of breeding up some domestic creatures, that I might have food when my powder and shot was all spent. January 3rd. I started to make wall, and this took my all time. N.B. I finished this wall on the 14th of April. All this time I worked hard. I found a little bag that I had brought from the ship. The mice had eaten the barley, leaving only husks. I had thrown the husks of corn out of my bag. That was before the violent rains. After a month, I noticed something green was shooting out of the ground. It was green barley. Since the climate was convenient to grow up these plants, I kept all the growing plants. Besides the barley, there were 20 or 30 stalks of rice, which I preserved with the same care to make food. April 30th. I was downhearted to see that my bread was getting less and less, so I decided to eat only 1 biscuit a day. May 1st. When the water began receding, I noticed a rather big thing in the sea. Approaching, I found a small barrel and the parts of the ship. I tried to make any way into the ship, but all the inside of the ship was choked up with sand. As soon as I found the ship, I forgot my new home, but I had learned not to abandon hope immediately, and I decided to carry everything possible from the ship. May 3rd. Starting work with the saw, I cut a huge pole, and as I could, I cleaned the sand on that side. May 5th through 8th. I worked on the wreck. I pulled some iron bolts and parts of the ship and returned home. I was very tired. I came across an immense bullet, but it was too heavy to carry. May 9th through 14th. Went every day to the wreck, and got a great many pieces of timber, and boards, or plank, and 200 or 300 weight of iron. May 15th. I had a powerful desire to cut the bullet with an axe. Nonetheless, I was hopeless seeing it in the water. May 16th. Again there was a storm at night. The wreck was more broken by the force of the water. I found the head side of the ship, but it was too heavy to carry. May 24th. I persisted in going to the wreck and pulling it out. I found 2 chests of sailors. I continued this work every day to the 15th of June. By this time I had gotten timber and plank and iron work enough to have built a good boat, if I had known how, and also I got, at several times and in several places, near 100 weight of the sheet lead. June 16th. I saw a big sea turtle when I came down the coast. June 17th. I cooked the turtle. The meat was delicious. June 18th through 19th. Owing to rain all day, I stayed in the tent, and I was amazed that the weather was so cold. I was trembling. I was sick. June 20th through the 27th. No rest all these days. Violent pains in my head, and feverish. June 28th. Slowly, thanks to sleeping well and rest, I pulled myself together. Nevertheless, I was not optimistic because of being exhausted and fearing again. My pains and aches would begin. At night I cooked 3 eggs of the turtle and ate. June 30th, July 2nd through 3rd. I was exactly well. I hunted 2 birds resembling wild geese, not desiring to eat. Again I ate the delicious eggs of the turtle. My illness was over, but after all, for a few weeks I tried to strengthen again. Chapter 4. July 4th through 14th. I strolled around the island with my gun in my hand. Meanwhile, I was aware that being abroad in the rain season was harmful to my health. I had been in this island for more than 10 months. I was sure that this island was isolated. There was not even a sign of life. July 15th. I tried to walk everywhere on the island. When I came down the river where I had carried the rafts to the land, I was surprised to see meadows around both sides of the river. Luckily, I saw a few sugar canes, too. I was thinking to estimate what the fruits and vegetables were used for. I encountered 4 fruit species, too, many melons and grapes. Especially the ripe ones were very tasty and sweet. I was happy to find them. As well as I could, I would pick them and dry in the sun, so that after fresh grape season, I would be able to eat them. On the other hand, I saw many kinds of trees like cocoa, orange, and lemon. I traveled homewards, resolving to come again, and bring a bag or sack to carry the grapes home. I had 2 small sacks, but unfortunately when I came back, my heap of grapes was spread around and some had disappeared. It was clear enough to understand the existence of wild creatures. Again I built a small house in this meadow. I had both a summer house and a winter house. I have worked for making these until the first days of August. September 30th. The anniversary of my landing on the island. Counting the notches on the poles, I understood having been on the island as long as 365 days. I fasted and begged God to forgive my sins. I counted the notches in groups of 7 and marked every 7th day as Sunday. In the meantime, my ink was lessening, so I decided to write a little. I would write only the important events. Anyway, it was time to use the barley and rice seeds which I had kept to plant. Not knowing which season was the most suitable for planting, I used some of them, but it never rained. I searched a damper place for the rest of the seeds, and I planted them there in February. It rained in March and April abundantly, and then I had learned in which season planting would be carried out. In this island, the year was not composed of 4 seasons as it was in Europe. Instead, there were of 2 as a dry and a rainy season. Having learned the painful results of walking in the rain, I ought to have obtained all of my food before the rainy days. Throughout the rain, I had been concerned with making baskets. I made a lot of baskets. I wanted to discover the whole island, so I began going around. I followed along the coast. This should have been America or else, maybe the region in which Spanish colonies existed. If this land was a Spanish coast, sooner or later a ship would cross definitely. Thinking of that, I was relaxed. I saw some parrots. I caught one and brought it home, but it was some years before. I could make him speak. However, at last I taught him to call me by my name very familiarly. I traveled along the shore of the sea toward the east, about 12 miles. Then, setting up a great pole upon the shore for a mark, I concluded I'd go home again, and that the next journey I took should be on the other side of the island, east from my dwelling, and so round till I came to my post again. So while I was going back with my dog, I followed another way. All of a sudden, I found myself in a deep valley, and worst of all, I didn't know where to go. I wandered about very uncomfortably, and at last I found the seaside, looked for my post, and I turned homeward. My dog caught a kid. I bound my thin rope round the neck of the animal with the aim of taming it. Returning home and lying on my hammock, there were not enough words to explain my happiness, that is, my home. As for me, it was unique all over the world. I rested for a week and distracted myself with my parrot named as Pole. The 30th of September was the 2nd anniversary of my landing on the island. I spent the day praying and giving thanks to God. For a long time past, I had thought to have been confined to the island eternally, believing I would never be free. The sea had confined me to this deserted island. But I changed my soul. I was reading prayer books every day, and once I saw these words, "I will never leave you." Feeling these words to have been said to me, and with God near me, life would be with me too. Having no material supplies, requisites, or a helper, further not having known anything about the works to do, my main reasons were to work hard. For instance, to make a high shelf, I had to work for exactly 42 days. Otherwise, with the tools required, the same work could have been completed in less time. I gave this example to show the reason why so much of my time went away with so little work. But with patience and labor, I got through everything that my circumstances made necessary for me to do. Chapter 5. November was coming. I hoped it was the time to harvest the crop, but meanwhile I was forced to protect my crop against the wild goats. And within 3 weeks I was able to hedge around the field. Then in a short time my plants began to shoot up and sprout. However, the birds had begun to come. I had been so enraged that approaching the hedge, I hunted 3 of them, and like the people in England did to the bandits, I hung them up with a chain, intending to frighten the others. Luckily, this method was beneficial, so again I never saw the birds. I had been successful in planting my seeds. Having worked for a week, I made a shovel, though shapeless and too heavy. Then I planted my seeds in 2 fields near my home. During the rainy season, I stayed in again. I wanted to make pots and pans of clay. I searched for suitable clay for pottery. It was a necessity to put my harvest in safekeeping. I eventually succeeded in making 2 pots in odd shapes. Thus I would keep grain in them. Most important of all, another need was the pots for liquids, and they should have been durable to fire. Anyway, I had set a big fire to fry the meat. In the meantime, I found a piece of the pots in the fire, hardened like a stone. Its color was red like a brick. I understood I would be able to harden the pots in this way. I was happy. After the great struggle, I had had 2 big earthenware cooking pots. I remembered the clothes among the things which I got from the ship, so I made 3 sieves of them, so they came in handy. I used them for years. A big part of the 3rd year had passed. Meanwhile, I was only preoccupied with how to leave the island. If I would be able to make a canoe, maybe I would succeed in leaving the island. But how to bring the canoe down the water didn't even pass through my mind. I began test trials to make the canoe, cutting down a cedar tree with great patience. I had cut with an axe for 20 days and the branches for 14 days. I worked by carving the upside of the trunk for exactly 3 months. Eventually, I completed my canoe with a 26-person capacity in addition to my load. I continued this work as I completed the 4th year on the island, but I couldn't get the canoe down the water. Then I understood that it was foolish to begin working without considering the cost. In the meantime, I finished my 4th year in this place and maintained the same devotion on my anniversary, and with as much comfort as ever before. I gained a different knowledge from what I had before. My worldly ideas had changed. Under these circumstances, the world was further away. I wasn't waiting for anything from it. In this world, only things which were practical were valuable. I had money filling a box, but they meant nothing for me. Luckily, there were other ideas consoling me. I was comparing my situation to when I first came to the island, for hours, even for days. If I hadn't taken anything from the ship, how would my fate have been? I learned to look more at the bright side of my condition. I learned to consider what I enjoyed rather than what I wanted. This gave me such secret comfort that I cannot express. There was another thought distracting me, that I supposed I had deserved this punishment, having been fearless of God and not listening to God's commands. Nevertheless, then I was very, very sorry. In spite of that, God had not punished me. On the contrary, God had given me all I needed. I hoped my repentance had been received and God had forgiven me. In time, my ink had already been used up, and I had eaten the zwieback quite economically. I had eaten only 1 zwieback in over 1 year. Also, my clothes amounted to 3 dozen shirts that I had gotten from the ship. The 5th year was nearly complete. I made a smaller canoe. I wanted to make a cruise round the island. I would have to save myself from this state. It was October 6th, the 6th year of my kingdom, or my captivity, after I set out on this voyage. But owing to the wind, I had to stay there for 2 days, and the sea got rough. Unfortunately, I had understood that to leave the coast was a big foolishness, but then it was too late. Suddenly I found myself near deeper water. The wind was milder. It didn't help me, and also it was of no use to row. After a short time I gave up hoping. I was lost, caught in the current. There was no hope of return. And in the afternoon I felt a mild wind on my face, blowing from south or southeast. After half an hour I was happy to feel the wind become more intense with the help of the current too. I approached the shore after about 5 miles. As soon as I landed on the island, I kneeled and thanked God. At night, I arrived at the valley on foot. I had fallen asleep. I woke up to the sound of a voice. Someone was saying, "Robinson, Robinson Crusoe, poor Robinson! Where were you? Where are you?" I saw my pole sitting on the top of the hedge, and immediately knew that it was he who spoke to me. I held out my hand and called, "Pole!" He kept on speaking as if he was happy to see me again. I had now had enough of the rumbling sea. I would have been very glad to have had my boat again on my side of the island, but I couldn't find a way to do this. I might run the same risk of being driven down the stream and carried by the island, so I contented myself on being without a boat. For a year I lived a very stable life, but my powder was getting less. How should I kill the goats? I set traps and I caught 3 kids, a male and 2 females. In about a year and a half I had 12 goats, kids and all, and in 2 more years I had 43, besides several that I took and killed for my food. Then I set up my diary. I sometimes had a gallon or 2 of milk in a day. With practice, I began to make butter and cheese too. If you had seen my dinner time with my family, you would have laughed. I was sitting at the head, the king of the island. Near me was Pole, my main servant, and the only one to talk to, and also my dog. I was used to luxurious living, having all opportunities except making real friends. One day in the afternoon, while I was going to my boat, I was dreadful when I saw the footprint of a man. I was full of astonishment and fear. Dealing with this, I wandered around, but I didn't see anything more. I didn't encounter another footprint. I began thinking that maybe it was only my imagination. Nonetheless, when I approached it, I understood that this was the footprint of a man. I had been struck with terror. I didn't know what to do, and I was thinking madly. As you can imagine, I didn't sleep at night for even a few hours. How was it possible a man should come there? Where was the vessel that brought him? What marks were there of any other footsteps? I thought that maybe wild beings on the island across the way had come, after having been caught in the current. Then they may have left. I was not free from doubt, and before comparing my foot with this footprint along the coast, I wouldn't be able to feel relaxed. I examined the footprint and saw that my foot was smaller than this print, so I was horrified again. I went back home. After having taken all the precautionary measures to protect myself, I had done all the things owing to only fear. While protecting myself, I didn't give up the work I had to do. Of course, I had to feed my goats. After having thought about it for a long time, I chose 2 ways to watch over my goat herd. I could find an appropriate cave to hide my herd, or I could hedge 2 places far away from each other to feed my kids. Under these circumstances, I started wandering around and found a deserted place as I had desired. I liked this meadow, which was bordered by trees, by thinking that nature had hedged this land. Moving the animals there, I attempted the hedges to be strengthened. I had to continue my way of life, so I made sure some of the herd was safe and protected. Gazing at sea, I saw something like a boat rather far away, but I wasn't sure. When I went down the hill, the boat had disappeared. As soon as I arrived at the coast, I was shocked. There were skulls, hands, feet, and other bones of human bodies. I didn't know what to do, seeing the shore was full of skeletons. And then I noticed a fire had been set in a large hollow. It was obvious that cannibals had eaten the poor slaves. I turned my head in another direction to avoid seeing these horrific things. I would faint. I began vomiting severely and felt better. Then I went to my home and pulled myself together, with tears in my eyes. I thanked God for being far away from these creatures. Chapter 6. After seeing these things along the shore, I had become torpid and spent 2 years on my side. In time, my fear subsided, and I began living without anxiety like before. I have been here for almost 18 years, and never saw the slightest resemblance of human footsteps. And I might be able to stay 18 years more if I keep myself hidden. Being more careful, I was always looking around. I desired to kill the wild. I began planning extreme things. I dug the place that they had set fire and put in 2 or 3 kilos of gunpowder, so that when they set the fire, the gunpowder would blow up and kill them. However, I didn't want to use up all my gunpowder. Leaving this plan, I thought of other things. I would hide myself in a suitable place, taking my rifles with me, and I would make a surprise attack on them. This plan distracted me for days. Eventually, I found an appropriate place, and I waited for them impatiently. The hill was 3 miles away from my home. I was gazing at the sea every day and waiting for them to come. But then I slowly abandoned this decision. As long as they didn't offend me, I mustn't kill them. As time went by, I had no doubt that the cannibals had come on the island, and in this case, fearful of them, I was careful. What would I have done if I had met them with a rifle with which I could fire only once? Thinking about these calamities, I had prepared myself to behave more cautiously. Because of thoughts like this, I found everything oppressively boring. Each night I prayed to God to protect me against the horrendous dangers I had not even perceived. I was thinking about my life more than my food, not even minding about driving a nail or cutting off some wood. I was totally anxious while I was setting fire. I carried out the work requiring fire in my new cave in the forest. I had found this cave by chance while I was searching for wood for the fire. I was cutting the thickest branches of the tree. At any rate, I have to mention about how I made charcoal. As I saw in England, I accomplished making charcoal from the branches, blackening the branches, and I fired them until they turned to charcoal and put out the fire. Then I brought my home, taking these charcoals together. I was able to set fire in my home without the danger of smoke. Anyway, on that day, while I was cutting the branches, I noticed that there was a hole behind the thick branches, and of course I was very curious about it. However, I must confess that as soon as I came into the cave, I rushed out. Seeing two large eyes on me inside while I was looking at the dark cave, I picked myself up immediately. I was terrified. I took up a firebrand and I entered the cave with the stick flaming in my hand. All of a sudden I heard the sighing of an animal like a human in pain. Following this mild voice, I was so dumbfounded that suddenly I began to sweat immensely. However, I moved ahead. Eventually, thanks to the fire, I saw a frightful old goat. He was not able to raise himself. I began looking around the cave, which was about 3 meters deep and had no shape, neither spherical nor quadrangle, so this was a nature-made place. The following day I went there with 6 candles, and I came into the cave once more. In fact, this required a lot of courage. After having passed the narrow way, the ceiling got higher, and I thought I had never seen a scene like this. The walls and the ceiling of the cave were shining with the light of the 2 candles. Because of this, I was very glad to have met this cave. Without waiting, I took my gunpowder, both of my rifles, and some other necessary things, and carried them to my cave. I thought of myself as a giant in the old ages, living in caves or holes of the rocks, where nobody could approach. Even if 500 savages had come, they couldn't have found me in this cave. Again, even if they had found me, they wouldn't have the power to attack me. 23 years passed since I came on the island. It was December, and it was harvest time. I had to work in the field, so I was waking up before sunrise. One day when I woke up, I was amazed. You cannot predict how scared I was. After all, when I saw a fire along the coast, I returned to my castle. I used to call my home a castle, and made my surroundings as natural as possible. I began praying to God to protect me from these barbarians. After having waited for 2 hours, I was impatient and curious about what was happening outside. Taking my binoculars, I lied face down and started searching the fireplace. I saw approximately 9 black people round the fire. I noticed that they had not set the fire in order to warm up. They were cannibals, so they had set it for cooking human meat. They had 2 canoes with them. Worst of all, they were quite near me, and as I had predicted, when tide began, I saw them getting in their canoes and leaving the island. As soon as I saw this, I ran to the hill where I had first seen them. Thus I figured out that cannibals were enough to fill 3 canoes. This was a dreadful scene. Even further down the coast, I saw traces of their feast. I was about to faint. The sand was bloody, human bones and skeleton pieces had been thrown around. And then 15 months passed, but I didn't see them again. After this event, my nerves were shot. I spent my time planning their death, instead of doing other work. I had forgotten not to accuse them of murder. After all, I was spending my days in anxiety, so 13 months passed. However, in May of my 24th year, I came across them, and this was rather an odd meeting really. How can I describe the vehemence of my trouble during the period of about 16 months? I couldn't have slept easily, having had terrible dreams. It was the middle of May, and according to my calendar it was the 16th of May. All day the violent wind blew. It thundered and the lightning flashed while I was reading my praying book. On the other hand, I was rather anxious about my situation. All of a sudden, I was startled to have heard a rifle sound, echoing from the sea. Then I prepared myself with a huge agitation. Pulling my stair right behind me, I climbed up the hill. After half a minute, a sudden explosion was echoed from the place where I had been caught in the current. So I noticed that a ship must have been there, and they were showing to be in danger by firing and demanding help. Immediately I took all my dried wood, piled it up, and set a big fire on the hill. So if there had been a ship, they would have seen the fire, and they did. Because as soon as the flames rose, I heard a rifle sound once more. When the sun rose, I saw something like a boat far away about the east side of the island. That day frequently I look at this direction. Before long I perceived that the boat was motionless. I came near the rocks. A ship which had crashed to the rocks and was pulled into pieces, seeing that I was very sorry very much. I could only feel compassion for these poor sailors, only being just an outlooker for the disaster, and I thanked God to have done me a favor, giving all manner of opportunities and providing me a life. Chapter 7. It was calmer and I could go near the ship, hoping to find something utile. But in fact I was not thinking this probability very much. In this case, the thing agitating me was the dream of finding someone on the ship. Maybe I could rescue him, and this plan was too strong to oppose, so I prepared all the things for the journey: bread, a large earthenware jar to fill up with fresh water, a compass, a lot of dried grapes, and a bottle of rum. Taking them all, I went to my boat, loaded my burden into it, and until carrying them to the boat, I was tired too much and sweat. Praying to God to help me in this journey, I set off. I was to launch out into the ocean and either venture or not venture. All of a sudden I remembered the danger I had overcome before. I began to dishearten. I thought supposing that I caught in current again, I wouldn't be able to be back. Having had a small boat, furthermore in a case that the weather would turn stormy and rainy, I had no doubt to see my end in advance. Both I wanted to continue, and on the other hand I shuddered at the thought of being lost. While I was confused in these thoughts, the sea began rising, and I understood it to be a tide once more. At the time of tide, a current was coming into being along the south side of the island. So with this ease, I calculated how to return back. Following the morning, I settled, leaving there together with the ebb tide, having spent the night in my boat, and I left there in the morning. Fortunately, I was able to fix my direction myself by rowing and rowing. I moved ahead the ship fast. In time less than 2 hours, I had approached the ship. When I saw the state of the ship, I felt sad, seeing that it was a Spanish galleon. It had become tightly wedged between the rocks, and back in the middle of the ship was pulled into the pieces. At that time, I noticed a dog at the deck. After having seen me, began the poor thing barking. In order to come nearby, the animal jumped into the water, and I took it into the boat. It was almost half dead. Then I gave it a small bread and water. After this, I went on board. The first thing I saw was 2 men drowned by embracing each other on the head side of the ship. It was obvious that the ship had been dragged and crashed into the rocks. I saw several chests, which I believe belonged to some of the seamen, and I got 2 of them into the boat, without examining what was in them. The ship had, no doubt, a great treasure in her, but of no use at that time to anybody. I took some gunpowder, a fire shovel, and tongs, which I wanted extremely. There was some money in one of the chests. I put the money to my new cave. Later on, after picking all the things along the coast, I returned to my canoe. By rowing and following the coast, I moved ahead. I wanted to rest for a while. I would have liked like my life before and been preoccupied with my work. The only difference would have been the obligement to be more careful. I was frequently looking at sea, and along the time I was wandering without anxiety. I had selected the east side because of being sure the cannibals not to have come this side. I lived in this condition nearly 2 years. My mind was busy with projects to get away from this island. The main reason of all unhappiness is excessive ambition and the desire to gain much more. Then I understood why my father advised me repeatedly not to be ambitious extremely. The successes I had had in a short time were not enough to make me happy. I had thought that I would be very rich in the future. Anyway, some mistakes like mine could be in life. Those are understood how they had cost someone a lot when the person becomes quite mature mentally. Here that I was in the same state. I had never been content to my fate. Even now I was planning to escape from this island and trying to find a way for it. In the month of May of my 24th year on this island, in a quite rainy season, in my hammock I was lying, being healthy and having no anxiety too. But in spite of that, I couldn't close my eyes and sleep by thinking fearful things again. Chapter 8. I had wandered around for years with a peaceful and relaxed mind. I stayed there in spite of being so near the cannibals. However, God had taken care of me from those horrendous dangers. Following this, I thought about other things. I then concentrated on what for the cannibals were in the world and where they were living. The last one could have been advantageous for me. Of course, I was thinking like this owing to my impatience and after my trouble for years. Again, I had gone to the ship hoping to find there someone alive to talk anything, and talking with someone, I would have learned about the location of the island. So I would have escaped from there. I had been content to my fate and had relied on God. However, with the last event, I had forgotten all the things completely. The only thing I was thinking was to arrive to the land visible across the island. I was so confused with these thoughts, and I was tired. The only solution to save myself from this island was to catch a wild person and benefit from him by getting hold of someone having been sentenced to death by the wild. But to do this was to be rather hard and dangerous. Any more, I had had some other thoughts. First of all, those men were my big enemies. If they had found an opportunity, of course, they would eat me with a great pleasure. By thinking like this, I was getting ready to defend myself. In a morning, I noticed 5 canoes to have come along the coast, but the wild having come within those were not in sight. How would I fight with 20 or 30 cannibals only by myself? Thinking this, I sat at my home in confusion and misery. Again, I wanted to carry out my plan in spite of all. If there had been an opportunity, I would have used it definitely. After having waited for a long time, I crouched down in a place not to be seen and looked them with binoculars. I saw that at least 30 cannibals had come. They had set fire and cooked meat, of which I didn't know, and turning around the fire they were dancing in strange figures. While I was watching them like this, they dragged 2 poor people out of a canoe, one of whom they killed. At that moment the other broke loose from their hand and began running with a great speed, going near my home. I cannot tell you how afraid I was. Between my castle and them there was a river. He jumped into the water without thinking and passed the river, swimming in 30 strokes. He began running fast. When the cannibals approached the river, I perceived that 2 of them did know swimming, the other backed. Any more, I was excited too much. At the end it was the chance I had been waiting for. So I would have had a friend, and maybe it was the opportunity to find a helper for me. Furthermore, my mind was ordering to save this poor's life. Because of this, I ran home and took 2 of my rifles then. With the same speed I climbed up the hill again. I took a shortcut and downed between the one escaping and the ones chasing. All of a sudden I yelled to the poor escaping loudly. To have seen me, he was badly frightened. Then I knocked over one of the cannibals, hitting his head with the butt of my rifle. The other was fearful. I approached him. In no time I saw that he had an arrow and a bow, so I killed him with a bullet. The poor wild escaping, seeing 2 men in this state, stopped and stayed motionless. Neither he was approaching nor leaving. Then I called him again and showed to come near. He understood immediately and approached a little, stopped again. Here I saw him trembling of fear. Again I gave a signal for him to approach, but again and again he was kneeling at my feet and giving thanks me to save his life. Eventually he had approached pretty well, and again knelt down and kissed the ground, so that I supposed he was trying to explain his slavery to me internally. The cannibal I had hit had regained his consciousness and was sitting. I saw that my wild began to fear again. He took my sword and ran to the enemy. With an attack he cut the head of the cannibal. After having done this, to indicate his victory, he backed laughing, and he gave my sword back. He took the arrow and the bow of the enemy. I showed him to follow along me, and I tried to tell the other cannibals could have come. However, he wanted to bury these cannibals, so when the other cannibals arrived, they would not have seen their friends. In no time he moved ahead and made a hole with his hands. In 15 minutes he had interred the bodies. Later on I brought him to my cave around the other side of the island. In my cave I gave him some bread, dried grapes, and water to drink. I had noticed him to have been so tired from running. After having eaten, I pointed to him the straw to sleep there. There was a blanket too, so the poor slept afterwards. He was quite a good-looking man, having sharply smooth legs and respect to me. He was about 26 years old. Furthermore, he was wholly lovable, like a European person, being more lovable while smiling. His bright, gleaming eyes had attracted me too much. He couldn't sleep well, so he came near me after half an hour. I was milking the goats. As soon as he saw me, running, he came, and again like before, putting his head on the floor, he caught my foot and put it on his head, so that he was trying to show that he was my slave. He stated that he would always serve me throughout his life. I indicated that I was quite pleased with him. Before long I began talking to him. First I taught him his name as Friday, the day I had saved him from the cannibals. Then I taught him the words master, yes, no, and their meanings. At last it was the turn of learning how to eat, showing in front of him all the things. I ate my bread by dunking it into my milk. I told him to try to act like me. In no time, surprisingly, he understood that. Then he explained to me with signs that he has been pleased with the sweetness of the milk and the bread. The following day, he showed me insistently the place in which he had interred the bodies of 2 cannibals, and he told that we should remove them from there and eat. So I explained to him how to have been revolted by this thought, and I pretended to vomit. Then I ordered him to climb up the hill together with me. Taking my binoculars, I gazed whereabouts the wild had appeared. However, there were neither the cannibals nor the canoes. Seeing this, I thanked God 1,000 times for this chance, since it was obvious pretty well that they had left a long time ago. But to understand was not enough to relax exactly. I took my man Friday with me and gave him my sword. We downed the location where the cannibals had stayed. Unfortunately, when I arrived there, in bewilderment and horror I was shocked. The scene was a big reason to have a sudden chest pain. The coast was full of man bones. The sands were bloody and half-eaten pieces of meat had been thrown around. The last things I was able to look were 3 skulls and bones of 5 hands and 4 feet. Afterwards we came to the castle. I had to do something for the appearance of Friday. I began the work giving him the flax undershirts of the drowned sailor. Then, showing all my competence, I sewed a vest. I was a skilled tailor than before. Finally he was contented too much to have worn like his master, but formerly he felt indisposed. This state pleased him later. With all my honesty, nobody would have had a servant faithful like Friday, never getting angry and never thinking slyly. He had devoted himself to me. He was carrying out all the things I demanded in a happy manner. I understood that the measures to save myself from him were totally meaningless. Even more, an attitude like this could have been a big insult to his excellent loyalty. Chapter 9. I was enjoying with him too much, and I began to teach all the things him to be beneficial. He was capable. I cooked the bread after having kneaded the flour and showed the work to Friday. In a surprisingly short time, he began to do all the work well like me. Since coming of Friday, I had to fill 2 men up. Due to this, I needed to plant a larger field and get more barley and rice. Furthermore, Friday worked continuously with pleasure, and while he was working, he was quite pleased. And he explained if I told him how the works were done exactly, he would work more. I had taught him English pretty well, so he was able to respond to my questions easily. One day I asked a question like, "Have the people in your country ever won a war?" Hearing this, he smiled and said, "Yes, we always fight better," implying with these words, yes, they had won the war. With a few questions, I had understood Friday to have been among the cannibals, having come on the other side of the island on the days of eating human. For a while, I took him to the place I had mentioned about, and in no time he recognized there. He said previously we ate 20 men, 2 women and a child here. He could not tell 20 in English, but he numbered them by laying so many stones in a row and pointing to me to tell them over. After this conversation, I asked him how far it was from our island to the shore, and whether the canoes were often lost. He told me there was no danger, no canoes ever lost, but that after a little way out to sea there was a current and wind, always one way in the morning, the other in the afternoon. This I understood to be no more than the sets of the tide, as going out or coming in, but I afterwards understood it was occasioned by the great draught and of the river Orinoco. Our island lay in the mouth of this river. The island I saw from the west and northwest was Trinidad Island. So maybe I asked nearly 1,000 questions about the people, the sea, and the coast, and which nations located. He replied with a great sincerity. Then I asked him how to go away from this island. He said, "Yes, I can go with 2 canoes," trying to say to go with a canoe as large as 2 canoes. After this day I had begun hoping to find an opportunity and escape from this island eventually. And this poor Wild, too, would have helped me. Meanwhile, I gave him in lessons dealing with the religion. In this case, slowly I informed him about God and explained all the things as possible as I could. Anyway, on the other hand, time was passing fast. Friday was competent to understand my words immediately and replying without difficulty. His English, in spite of no using any grammar rules, was quite fluent. Once in a while, I exactly explained all about me, my life, how to have fallen on the island, how many years I had spent there, and all the happenings then. I gave him gunpowder and a knife, and taught how to fire, which greatly pleased him. Also I made him a belt and gave an axe to attach on his belt. Later on I told him about Europe, especially mentioned about England, my motherland. I revealed how we lived, how we behaved to each other there, and how we traded in ships to different places of the world. Then I showed him the ruin of the ship we had had to leave. Upon seeing this boat, Friday stood still for a while and said nothing. At last he said, "I saw such a boat. It came to place at my nation." I understood that a boat such as that came on shore upon the country where he lived. It was driven thither by stress of weather. I inquired after a description of the boat. Friday described the boat to me well enough and added, "We saved the white mans from drown." Then I presently asked if there were any white men in the boat. "Yes," he said, "the boat were full of white men." I asked him how many. He told upon his fingers 17. I asked him then what became of them. He told me, "They live, they dwell at my nation." Upon this I inquired of him more critically what was become of them. He assured me they lived still there, that they had been there about 4 years, that the savages left them alone, and gave them victuals to live on. I asked him how it came to pass they did not kill them and eat them. He said, "No, they make brother with them. They no eat mans, but when make the war fight." One day while wandering around, unintentionally, I climbed up the hill on the other side. Having had a quite clear weather, I had seen before there the land across. That's that, America, while looking around again on a calm day. At that moment, when Friday saw the land, he was bewildered too much, and with a great excitement he began jumping and dancing in very odd manners. I was rather far away, and he called me near him. He loudly said, "I'm very happy, happy to see my land there, my country." So it was obvious him to be in his country, of course. Seeing his state, I must say to have been anxious. I had first felt doubt about him. If he had the opportunity to back to his land, he wouldn't only forget my teaching to him, also he would forget his duty to me. There he would express something about me to the people of his tribe, and maybe later on, by returning with hundreds of cannibals, they would give themselves a lavish meal with me. However, it was easy enough to see how innocent he was. I never heard his word to support my doubt. Again in the morning we climbed up the same hill, but in this turn it was rather hazy, and the coast across didn't come into sight. Calling Friday near, and I questioned, "Do you want to be among your people in your country?" And I had a reply, "Yes, too much." In a case like this, in fact I should confess that I had planned to go there again. I wanted to join those men who were Spanish and Portuguese. Then all together we could find a way to escape from there. Even more, I would make friends with the white, being better than living on an island 40 miles far away from the coast by myself. After having thought like this during a few days, by taking Friday I went to work. There I said I could give my canoe to him, seeing his mastery of using the canoe. Since he was using skillfully like me. All of a sudden I asked, "Will we go to your country, do you want?" He said that we needed a bigger boat. The following day we went to my boat, which I couldn't have downed into the water. Seeing my boat, he said, "It is big enough, but it was rotten." I was too determined to pass the sea across. I ordered him to make a boat like this again, so he too would go back to his land using canoe. But he didn't respond and became serious and upset. Then said, "Yes, I want to be there too. Friday doesn't want to go there without his master." "Okay, I will come with you too, but what will we do there?" He returned me smiling, "You will do them a great favor, teaching the wild to be good men, telling them God, and so providing them to maintain a new and a better life." He was speaking great. I think he had planned those before. He had said these words with a big sincerity, since I understood this real sincerity from his tears on his eyes. So I had completely believed the love he felt, and he was enough sure not to leave me at any rate. After all, my ambition to save myself from this island was too strong. Owing to this, without spending any spare time, I began to work with Friday. For this we needed to cut a tree and make an appropriate canoe for the journey. However, the most important thing to do was find a tree near the water, so we would take it down the coast easily when it was completed. I didn't want to repeat my mistake again. Eventually, Friday chose a suitable tree, thinking the middle of the tree to fire, so he would be able to give a specified shape to it. Of course, I showed the equipment with which we could cut and carve it. After having learned to use the equipment, we started working ambitiously. During a month we were working every day. He had made a canoe especially by benefiting from our axes. After having completed totally, it had taken 20 days to down into the water. When it was fitted onto the water, we were sure our boat to be able to carry 20 people easily. Friday was using the boat pretty well by rotating it with rowing and making it go wherever he wanted. In spite of this, I had a plan. We would put a pole on the boat and set sail. To prepare the sail had taken my 2 months. Then I assembled the pole and sail. That's more. To rotate the boat, I fixed a rudder too. Essentially, I was not an excellent sailor, but I knew how a rudder was required. At the end, I began to teach Friday the rules about the course of our boat. He knew to row well. However, he had nothing about the sail and rudder, so that we worked hard, and he learned everything in a clever manner. Anyway, it was my 26th year on the island. I had had a loyal friend for 3 years, having changed all of the things in my life in a good direction. I was thanking God for his mercy every year. On the other hand, I didn't give up my daily works there. I was planting my fields, drying my grapes, so I did all the work with free of deficiency. Meantime, the rainy season had come, so any more we spent our time at home. I had brought our new canoe and anchored there rather tightly. Cutting a lot of branches, I covered over the boat. Afterwards, we began waiting for the months of November and December, since I intended to set off about that time. When the rainy season was over and the weather became calmer, I began thinking of the journey. We made a program to prepare ourselves for the journey, and I said to Friday to down the coast and find a sea turtle. because then we were catching a sea turtle once a week and utilizing both their eggs and meat. With this order, Friday left. However, he moved back running, and he began to yell loudly. "Master, master, frightful, very terrible, the cannibals!" "What's up, Friday?" I asked. There, 1, 2, 3 canoes." "Well, Friday, you shouldn't be afraid of them." I heartened him as possible as I could. He was so trembling that I, in a big confusion, went to calm him down and explained that I was, too, in menace. I was in as much danger as he, and that they would eat me as well as him. "But," said I, "Friday, we must resolve to fight them." I got some rum and had Friday drink it. After having drunk, I gave him 2 small rifles, and as I did always, attached my sword without its sheath on my belt, and gave the axe to Friday. After having made the preparations, I climbed up the hill to see exactly what was happening there. While looking with my binoculars, I noticed there to be 21 cannibals, 3 captives, and 3 canoes. They had landed near the river where the coast was lower. I went down the hill and said to Friday, "I am certain to kill them. I will kill all of them. Will you help me?" He had heartened with the effect of the rum I had given him, and immediately in a cheerful mood, he told that he would die whenever I ordered. I decided that while wandering around the forest, I would approach them well. It was easy enough to observe them with the binoculars in my hand. We shared our guns. I told Friday that these cannibals were his enemies, and according to their customs, he had the right to fight against them. Eventually I settled to draw near them. I called Friday, showing him the gigantic tree, and told him to go there. "Look what they are, then come back and let me know, okay?" He did so, and came immediately back to me, and said, "I saw all of them. They have gathered around the fire, eating the flesh of one of their prisoners. Another slave will lay bound upon the sand a little from them. They will kill him next," whom he said they would. He told me it was not one of their nation, but one of the bearded men that came to their country in the boat. I was filled with horror at the very naming of the white bearded man, and going to the tree in a heartbeat, I saw plainly a white man. He lay upon the beach of the sea with his hands and his feet tied. He was a European and had clothes on. There was another tree and a little bush beyond it. I got behind some bushes. Now I was nearer to them. I could see them clearly. 19 of the dreadful wretches sat upon the ground. They had just sent the other 2 to butcher the poor slave and bring him perhaps limb by limb to their fire. I had not a moment to lose, so I backed to Friday. "Now it's your time to do things I explained before." "Yes." "Now look at me, and whatever I do, do the same thing too, and don't be late." Then I took my aim at the cannibals with the rifle, asking him, "Are you ready?" "Yes," he replied. "In that case, shoot them." At the same moment, I shot too. Chapter 10. Of course you can predict the fear of the cannibals. On and on I fired at them. Friday took his aim so much better than I. He killed 2 of them, and wounded 3 more. And on my side I killed 1, and wounded 2. They were, you may be sure, in a dreadful situation. The ones that were not hurt jumped upon their feet, but did not immediately know which way to run. Friday kept his eyes close upon me. "Are you ready, Friday?" said I. "Yes," said he. "Shoot them then," said I, "in the name of God." And with that I fired again. 2 of them died, but so many were wounded that they started running hither and thither, by yelling loudly and screaming like mad creatures. 3 more fell quickly after, though not dead. I handed the bigger weapon and popped out of the forest running. Friday was running too. I went straight near the victim, lying on the sand in a desperate situation. I told Friday to shoot at the ones in the canoe. While Friday was firing at them, using my knife, I cut the ropes around the poor victim and asked him where he was from in Portuguese tone. But I received an answer with Latin words. "I am European." Being too tired, I saw that he was about to faint, so I took out my rum bottle and had him drink it. Then I gave a piece of bread. He ate immediately. He was Spanish. Later on we will talk, but right now we have to fight, of course. At least if you have power enough, let's attack on them, okay? Thanking me, he loaded the weapons and assaulted toward the killers with an extreme wrath. Instantly he chopped them to bits. They were so scared of our weapons then that they were not in the state to be able to think to run away. While I was loading the rifles, there was a harsh clash between the Spanish and the one of the cannibals. As I saw, the wild was attacking with a wooden sword to the Spanish man. If I had not obstructed him, he would have chopped the Spanish with that sword. The Spanish, with a logical decision, left the sword, and taking the rifle I had given him, he shot at him and killed the cannibal. The Spanish came closer to me, and he wanted one more rifle. I gave him one of the small rifles. As soon as he got the rifle, following two wild, he wounded one. The other cannibals ran into the forest. Friday killed 2 of them. A wild man in canoe was shot, but we didn't know whether he died or not. There were also 3 of them in the canoe. As a result, 17 of the cannibals were killed. 4 escaped in the boat, 1 wounded, if not dead. I was very anxious about their escape. Carrying the news home to their people, they should come back perhaps with 200 or 300 of the canoes and kill us. So I decided to follow them and catch them. I ordered Friday to come with me, and I jumped into the canoe. However, we had a big surprise to see one more victim in the canoe, having his hands and feet tied with ropes. They left him too, like the Spanish man. The poor man was just to die of fear. Since they had not only bound his hands and feet, also they had bound his neck. Furthermore, because of those tight ties, he was about to die. At once I cut the ties, but he thought I would kill him. As soon as Friday arrived, I wanted him to talk to him and say him to have been rescued. Taking out of my pocket, I gave a rum bottle to have the poor man drink some. When Friday looked at his face, he changed in a wink. By embracing, he kissed him, laughed, yelled, cried, jumped and danced, sang and again began crying. I wanted him to tell me what was up. Eventually he regained consciousness and said that the wild was his father. With the rescue of his father from the hands of the cannibals, he went wild. To have understood his father's circulation of blood slow, I gave Friday rum to rub his hands and feet with it. Owing to Friday's meeting his father, we could not chase the cannibals. Then I noticed that we had done the best not to follow them. After 2 hours, a horrible storm broke suddenly. I don't imagine the canoe should resist the storm, being impossible to reach the coast across. Friday was not in a state to perceive anything except for his father, of course, so I didn't order him anything. He gave his father some dried grapes, and then in no time he began running like to have been bewitched with a great speed. Already I had not ever seen a man running as nimble and fast as Friday. He returned within 15 minutes with an earthenware jar, bringing water to his father. The water enlivened the man. Poor man was about to die. I called after his father had drunk the water and wanted to know whether there was water left in the jar. He replied yes. So I had the Spanish drink the water, because he was in a bad state from exhaustion. His gratitude he felt was clear in his eyes, yet he was tired extremely also, to have left his power while fighting. Even he was not able to stand by himself. He tried to keep himself standing, but he couldn't. I told him not to move and showed Friday to rub the Spanish too, with rum as he did to his father. Being merciful, while he was rubbing the Spanish, Friday was turning his head and controlling his father again and again. All of a sudden, when he didn't see him, he ran fast, but soon he noticed him to lie down to rest. He relaxed and drew near me. Then Friday shouldered the Spanish and immediately took him into the canoe, and then his father by embracing him again. Later on he rowed the canoe fast along the coast and the river. Not before long he moved the canoe in the river. Neither a man nor a horse could move as fast as him, in fact. Jumping out of the canoe, I helped our visitors to get out. Both the father and the Spanish were not in a state to be able to walk. In that case, Friday was confused about what to do. So calling him, I had them sit along the coast and ordered him to come near me. Meantime, I made something like a stretcher, so we easily carried them. However, we met a big obstacle when we reached the high walls of my castle. It was impossible to take them inside. We set off the work at once, and from the old pieces of sail we set up a pretty good tent. Preparing 2 beds out of the rice straw, we covered them with blankets. There were people on my island now. I was feeling glad. I laughed thinking that I was like a king. After all, the island was mine, and I had the right to administer it. Second, they all owed their lives to me, and were ready to lay down their lives for me when needed. I was the king of them, and I could put the law into practice. The most strange was that my citizens consisted of only 3 people. Furthermore, each had a different religion. My servant Friday had turned into Protestantism. His father was worshipping an unknown religion, and I was certain that the Spanish was Catholic. But I gave the freedom of religion. The poor captives, being so tired, settled themselves in the tent. Now we needed something to eat, so I had Friday butcher a goat of my herd. Friday brought the goat, picked the meat out of their bones, cut into small pieces, and he cooked it. Adding some rice and barley into it, we were able to get quite a delicious meal. Taking the meal to the new tent, I set a table for the guests. I ate my meal together with them, and as possible as I could, I tried to make the father and the Spanish feel more courageous. Meanwhile, Friday was translating my words to his father. He was also taking to the Spanish, for the Spanish knew the language of the wild. Following the dinner, I mandated him to get in one of the canoes and take our weapons back, because we had to leave them there. The next day started Friday to go and bury the bodies of the wild. He did all of my sayings, and thus for nothing there was left even to let someone know that the cannibals had ever existed. Even more, I could by no means remember the place of the fight. Then I began talking to these 2 men, asked them whether the cannibals would be back or not. However, Friday's father said it was impossible for the savages in the boat to resist against the violent storm. Since it had continued along at night, they must have drowned. Of course, the cannibals couldn't believe people to have killed from so far distance, even without touching. Anyway, luckily again the cannibals didn't try to return to my island, so it was clear that 4 friends of them had been able to back their country. Owing to fearing of their telling, the others didn't land on the island again. Any more they believed all the people who would go to the bewitched island would be killed by the fire of God. As time went by, my apprehension too was nearly over, and again I began thinking to set off the journey. Friday's father told me to be sure about if I arrived their coast. The people of his country would help me. Then I asked the Spanish what had happened to him, and he explained. Our ship was a Spanish ship which left from Rio de Plata, loaded with leather and silver. When our first ship sank, 5 of our sailors died. With lifeboats, we approached the coast after having coped with a lot of difficulties. We were hungry. Then there was full of cannibals, and we were afraid of being eaten by them every second. I asked another question again. Okay, what will be the others there up? Had they planned anything to rescue themselves from this unpleasant situation? We debated about this very well, but there is no absolute decision. I said, how will they meet if I claim a proposal? Or if all of your friends were there, would we set off together with them? Then I made it clear that I was dreadful about their friends, could harm me anyway, and added that people forgot the kindness having been done very speedily, and went on speaking that, of course after having done all the requirements to rescue them, I don't want them to behave to me as the slaves in New Spain, since I know pretty well they had killed the English there. In that case, I received an exact honest reply. We never thought to do anyone harm, especially to the ones who have done favors to us. And he continued, I am certain that they would welcome all the things to be in your management, since I would have them swear so you would be both their president and commander. We would go where you want. Furthermore, until we would have landed on a country safely, they would be at your disposal. Even more, I can have them sign an agreement or a contract. All of them are trustworthy and civilized. If you rescue them, I'm sure that all will be encouraged to die for you. After those expressions, I wanted to rescue them. The Spanish had seen the rice and the barley which I had stored before. Those were enough for only me. However, there for the 4 people on the island were not enough. Even if the friends across arrived, these rice and barley would not be sufficient. Fortunately, the Spanish said, If you want, I with Friday and his father can clear the new lands up and plant there again. Then we will wait for the harvest season, so we will have sufficient barley and rice also for our friends." The explanation of him was quite logical, so that we started working. In a month we had cleared a field up and plowed. Already at the end of the month harvest time arrived. Meanwhile, we were still thinking the idea of escaping from the island. Anyway, I showed them big lumber I had cut and put in running order with huge difficulty. So they cut wooden beams in numbers and a dozen out of sound oak. You can estimate how to have struggled to do this. Afterwards I began trying to have more goats. For this reason I got the Spanish and Friday sent to the forest every other day, so we were working each in turn. Eventually we had handed in kids up to 20. Even more, the season of drying the grapes had come. The grapes and bread would form the main part of our food, being very significant. Our harvest was pretty good. It was obvious that would meet our need. If the other 6 Spanish were on the island, it would be sufficient to all of us till the other harvest time. Or if we had set off the journey, the grain would be enough for us. After having sorted the barley and the rice, we started making baskets. The Spanish was very competent in this work. After having noticed the food was sufficient for the guests who had come, the Spanish and Friday's father left the island with the canoe in which they had been brought to the island. I gave them some bullets and gunpowder with 2 big rifles. Chapter 11. In fact, this was a pleasurable work, since I had been on the island for 27 years, and then I was preparing leaving it. I wished them a good journey and gazed them leaving the shore. In return, I decided to assemble a sign on their canoe to understand who was coming. And the time of full moon they left with the smooth wind. Along exact 8 days I had waited them to come rather restlessly, so that time seemed like years, even ages. Again while I was waiting, a quite strange event, which maybe in history no one had ever met similar to this, happened. Anyway, one morning I was sleeping deeply in home. My servant Friday drew near me yelling, "Master, they've arrived!" I then popped out of my bed as speedily as I could. I dressed myself up, and without thinking the danger I flied out, passing through the smaller grove. However, I didn't take the weapons together with me. There was a boat with a triangle sail moving ahead the coast. It was out about 1.5 leagues distance. All of a sudden I noticed the boat's direction. It did not come from that side which the shore laid on, but from the southernmost end of the island. Thus we started to wait. We didn't know whether they were comrades or our enemies. With the big desire to gaze the ones in the boat, I rushed up to the ladder and climbed up the hill. Eventually, when I arrived at the hill, I noticed a ship at anchor. It was located at the direction of south or southeast. It appeared to be an English ship, and the boat appeared to be an English boat. To have seen a ship, I was rejoiced pretty well. Furthermore, my citizens were in this ship. On the other hand, I had got suspicious about that. A voice was yelling in my mind not to act quickly. Before all, what was an English ship doing in those waters? I knew there had been no storms to drive them in there. If the ones in the ship were really English citizens, of course, it was apparent that they had not been here with good aims. In a case like this, I ought to have been very careful in order not to fall under the thieves' and murderers' control. At any rate, I had done the most logical decision by thinking these. I would have died if I hadn't paid attention to this vital warning. I would have been in a worse condition than the condition I had been in. Anyway, you will understand this state later. I had stayed in the same mood without having an ability to think anything for a long time. Because of not approaching well to the east, they couldn't have seen the river into which I had carried my rafts. Eventually, a half-mile far from my home, they removed the boat on the shore. Otherwise, they would have landed on in front of my home exactly. After having landed, I saw them to be English, supposing 2 of them to be Dutch. However, I had been mistaken in this topic. There were 11 men. 3 of them were unarmed, and as I thought, bound. And when the first 4 or 5 of them jumped on shore, they took those 3 out of the boat as prisoners. One of whom, it seemed to me, was begging. The other 2 were lifting his hands and giving an impression of being very anxious. I couldn't estimate what the situation meant. Friday, as well as he could speak with a smooth English, called out to me, "Master, see you? The English will eat their captives exactly same with the cannibals." "How do you mean they will eat these men?" I replied with a question. Insisting, Yes, they will eat the innocent people." "No, no, Friday," I said. "I'm afraid they will kill them, not eat." In a case, one of the men raised his sword, and I supposed he would down it to the head of one of the poor victims. Anyway, those insolent sailors, after having battered the captives, began wandering around the island. Therefore, the 3 men were also free in this case, but instead of rolling around, they started to think, sitting desperately. Then this reminded me the day when I first set foot on the island. I had been afraid too. I had climbed up the tree and slept with difficulty. The men had landed on the island when the water was high, but any more the sea had receded and their lifeboats had run aground. They had left 2 men in the lifeboat. I had understood later that they have gone to sleep with the effect of the cognac they had drunk. One of them woke up before. By figuring out that the boat had run aground in an impossible state to remove, he called the others. But they didn't have enough power to save the boat. The boat was heavy, and the soft beach was like a swamp. At the last moment, by abandoning to try to remove the lifeboat, they backed. After all, I had not left my place. I had had no encouragement to go away from my castle, so I was happy to believe that the castle was concealed quite well. The boat wouldn't be able to move before 10 hours, until the weather would get dark. Thus maybe I would be able to gauge the behaviors of the men excellently, and if they would talk, I would be able to listen to them. Meanwhile, I had prepared myself to the fight before. I had Friday with me, a capable hunter. I brought the weapons. I gave him 3 big rifles. At 2 o'clock, when the sun began burning around, I saw the men go into the forest by walking. I thought they were going there in order to sleep in the shadow. The other 3 men were in a huge dread. Of course, they weren't in a state to sleep. In a case like this, I decided to go near the 3 men and learn something about them. Comically, I and Friday, were in a very strange wearing with our big weapons. But I was the most horrible one, like a creature having arrived from another world. I didn't let them see me while approaching, and then in Spanish I asked a question like, "Who are you, men?" Naturally, they were startled to hear my voice. However, to have seen me, they were more surprised. Fearing of my wearing and the weapons, this time I spoke in English. "Men, looking my appearance, don't be bewildered so much. Maybe at a moment when you are so hopeless, there is a friend near you?" One of them talked in a very, very somber attitude. So they had sent him from the heaven, since the people are unable to help us anymore. I replied immediately, "All help comes from the heavens, sir. It seems you are in huge danger." Tears began to pour down from the eyes of the poor man. On the other hand, he was shaking like a leaf. "Are you really a human or an angel?" Then I said, "If God had sent an angel for your survival, he would have dressed him well. So I am a human, sir. I am an Englishman and ready to help you. I have a servant and weapons and gunpowder." The man began talking then. "I am the captain of that ship. Those men rebelled against me. Eventually, they decided to bring me with these 2 men, one of whom is second captain, and the other one is a passenger. To have supposed here deserted, they thought we would die here without help." Then the man showed the tree ahead. "They lie there, sir. If they see us, they will kill all of us." "Have they any weapons?" "Only 2 weapons they have, which they had left in the lifeboat. So let the work to me. I think all of them are sleeping. In this circumstance, it is easy to kill them. Or else do you want to take them captive? Among them there are 2 swine. To feel mercy for them will be our biggest mistake. However, if they are caught, I am sure that the others will come to power and go back to work." So I said, "Let's go farther from this place where they can hear and see us. If they wake up, we will have a big difficulty to cope with them, okay?" In no time they obeyed me. We walked one after the other and went through the trees. "Listen to me, sir," I began. "If I rescue you, will you provide 2 things I request?" Then by looking at them I said, "I have only 2 conditions like that. During your stay on the island, you will never try to order me anything. If I give you weapons, after the fight you will give it back to me immediately. You won't be interested in the things belonging to me, and as long as we stay on this island, you will be under my order. The second one is that if we are able to save the ship, you will bring me and my man to England without demanding any price, okay?" The captain swore to be always devoted to me by saying, "I think the same things with you in these sensible requests. Besides, I owe my life to you. I shall never forget that." The captain explained to be faithful to the promise and claimed to set out according to my commands. In this case, best of all was to fire the men while they were sleeping. Yet the captain with a big sincere behavior said, "I have not ever had a desire like killing them. Only the 2 ones are swine who will never become well behaved. They had started the rebel on the ship. If they are able to escape and achieve to be on the ship, this will mean our death. So the first work of them will be to call the others and kill us." While we were planning work in this state, I saw the other to begin wakening. After a moment I saw 2 men stand up, and I asked, "Are they the ringleaders?" He said, "No." "So you can permit them to escape. But if the others escape, it's your fault, of course." After having heard these sayings, the captain was enlivened and grasped the rifle I had given him before. He moved ahead with the second captain and the passenger by carrying the rifles with them. Yet to have created noise, one of the seamen who was awake turned about, and seeing them coming, cried out to the rest. But it was too late, for the moment he cried out they fired. I mean the 2 men, the captain wisely reserving his own piece. They had so well aimed their shot at the men they knew, that one of them was killed on the spot, and the other very much wounded. Not being dead, he started up on his feet, and called eagerly for help to the other, but the captain, stepping to him, said, "It's too late to call for help now. Pray God to forgive your sin which you had committed." With that word the captain knocked him down, so that he never spoke more. There were 3 more in the company, and one of them was slightly wounded. When they saw danger, and that it was in vain to resist, they begged for mercy. The captain said to them, "Swearing to be remorseful very much owing to your sin, I will forget all the happenings and I won't kill you." The men swore to be faithful to the captain as long as they lived. Then later on the 3 who had left the others were back to have heard the fire. When they saw the men who were their captives short before, and then were their captives again, they also surrendered. Chapter 12. It was the time to tell my story to the captain and listen to his. By starting with me, I told all the events. He was deeply affected and surprised. Eventually, he imagined that I had survived in order to rescue him, and the tears were pouring down from his eyes. It was rather a tragic scene. Then I took them to my house. They found my concealing home through the grove very rational. I stated to the captain, "Here is my castle and my residence. Furthermore, like princes, I also have a summer home, and I shall show it another time." Now the basic work to do was to save the ship. But the captain replied, "I don't exactly know what to do, since there are still 26 people in the ship, all of who had participated in the rebellion. Owing to this reason, their lives are under a huge danger, according to the law. Being defeated to their hopelessness, they will resist along with their total power, so we aren't able to attack on them with this small group." What he said was rational. Something was to be done quickly. We had to fall them into a trap, so that they couldn't find an opportunity to attack on us. It occurred to me that in a little the ship's crew, wondering what was become of their comrades and of the boat, would certainly come on shore in their other boat to look for them, and that then, perhaps, they might come armed, and be too strong for us. This he allowed to be rational. I told him my plan. "Before all, let's unload the lifeboat along the shore. Take whatever was in it, so the ones who would land on the island would see the boat in this state, which couldn't be used. They wouldn't try to bring it with them. In lifeboat, a bottle of cognac, a bottle of rum, a few zwiebacs, a full sack of gunpowder, and a lot of sweets were there. We took them. How happy I was! It was impossible to explain, since for years neither I had drunk cognac nor eaten any sweet. When we had carried all these things on shore, the oars, mast, sail, and rudder of the boat were carried away before. We knocked a great hole in her bottom, that if they had come strong enough to master us, yet they could not carry off the boat. Indeed, it was not much in my thoughts that we could be able to recover the ship, but my view was that if they went away without the boat, I would make it again fit to carry us to the Leeward Islands, and find our Spanish friends there. By dragging the boat, we advanced it well. Thus even when the flood tide started, we wouldn't be able to move and drag it. Afterwards, while we were talking what to do in this state, we heard a fire from the ship. Of course they were giving signs for the boat to come on board. Seeing the lifeboat stand motionless, they downed the second boat into the water. Meanwhile, I saw the men in the ship by rowing another boat toward the shore. They had weapons. Being the ship 9 miles farther than the coast, we were able to see them while they were approaching. By rowing they approached and came to the location where the others had landed. That's that, where the first lifeboat had drowned near. Sooner or later we could notice the whole group, with whom the captain was acquainted very well, and whose characters he knew as their captain. In the lifeboat from a side quite near them, suddenly the captain muttered to himself, "Among them there are very honest men who weren't able to make a stand against the number of the sailors in the rebellion." Then he continued his explanation. "However, between the seamen in the lifeboat, the one with the highest rank is the worst man. The rest of this gang, they are aware of that their lives were under a big danger owing to have rebelled." Then smiling at him I said, "A man in our position is afraid of nothing, seeing as we won't be in a more horrible situation. Even if we die or survive, it will be our release. Have you believed me to have sent God to come to your rescue? Yet in this manner I have a single question in my mind." He asked, "What's that, sir?" "You've explained that there are 3 or 4 sailors who needed to be rescued among them. So if all of them were the sinful men, the fight would be merciless and easy. Every man that comes ashore is our own, and shall die or live as they behave us." Suddenly I noticed the captain to have been emboldened as well. Then we thought to send our captives to the different sides of the island. 2 of them, of whom the captains were less assured than ordinary, I sent with Friday, and one of the 3 delivered men to my cave, where they were remote enough, and out of danger of being heard or discovered, or of finding their way out of the woods, if they could have delivered themselves. Here they left them bound, but gave them provisions, and promised them, if they continued there quietly, to give them their liberty in a day or 2, but that if they attempted their escape, they should be put to death without mercy. They promised faithfully to bear their confinement with patience, and were very thankful that they had such good use as to have provisions and light left them, for Friday gave them candles, such as we made ourselves, for their comfort, and they did not know but that he stood sentinel over them at the entrance. The other prisoners had better usage. 2 of them were kept imprisoned indeed, because the captain was not able to trust them, but the other 2 were taken into my service, upon the captain's recommendation. So with them we were 7 men, well armed, and I made no doubt we should be able to deal well enough with the 10 that were coming, considering that the captain had said there were 3 or 4 honest men among them also. When the men approached, exactly alongside where the other lifeboat was standing, they removed the boat on the coast, and all of them popped out of it. After landing on the island, they rushed toward the boat. Immediately to have seen the boat, which we had made a hole in the middle of it and unloaded, they got angry too much. Then with all of their voice they yelled to the island. By doing this, they were trying to have their friends here. The lifeboat went far a little. However, in a short time, they began to row back. Then they arrived, leaving 3 mariners in the boat as watchmen. Thus it was quite clear they would look for their friends on the island. Of course it was of no use to catch the men who had started to look around any more. If the watchmen in the boat understood the state, they would return to the ship by rowing back without thinking. The ones who had landed on the coast moved ahead the hill where my home located. Of course we would feel glad if they came near us. We would fire at them. Anyway, they shouted and called their friends until they got tired. After a long while, we noticed that the men were going ahead the boat. Once more they were returning to the ship. Seeing this, the captain was in so bad situation that nearly he would have finished. However, I made a plan which would have the mariners back. I ordered Friday and the second captain to move towards the river at the north. I said to them to start yelling with all their voices. As soon as they hear the seamen answer them, they should return it again, and then, keeping out of sight, always answering them, they would draw them as far into the island and among the woods as possible, and then wheel about again to me by such ways as I directed them. They fell into our trap in no time by rushing to the side where the voice rang, by answering the second captain and Friday. Whereas they reached the river, they had to stop because of the water which got rough. It was impossible to cross. As I had predicted, they called for the boat to come up and set them over. When they had set themselves over, they fastened the boat to do a little tree on the shore. They left only 2 people in the boat. This was what I wished for, and immediately leaving Friday and the captain's mate to their business, I took the rest with me. The men in the boat were surprised to have seen us. The captain ran upon one of them and knocked him down. Then he called out to the one in the boat, "Either you yield or you will see your end." Naturally he surrendered. Already, as I understood, most of the men were regretful to have involved in this rebellion. The man surrendered, but also he agreed to join us and help with loyalty. In the meantime, Friday and the captain's mate managed their business very well with the rest. They drew them by hallooing and answering from one hill to another, and from one wood to another. They made them tired, and also left them in the woods. They were lost, and they would not be able to reach the boat. Any more, the only need was to wait them in darkness and ambush them as they approached enough. Finally, they reached the coast, but they couldn't see their friends there. They were saying to each other that they had been stuck on an island of devils and ghosts. My men were waiting my orders to attack on them again. However, I didn't want my servants to die. We approached them slowly and softly. I ordered the captain and Friday to go crawling. The ringleader, with 2 more of the crew, came walking towards the captain and Friday. The captain and Friday attacked them, and the firing broke out. They killed the ringleader and wounded the other sailor. The third one ran away. We were 8 people, I, Friday, the captain, his 2 men, and the 3 captives whom we gave weapons. We came upon them. It was so dark that they could not see our number. I made the man they had left in the boat, who was now one of us, to call them by name, to try to reach an agreement. So he called out as loud as possible, "Tom Smith! Tom Smith!" Tom answered immediately, "Is that Robinson?" It seems he knew the voice. The other answered, "Yes, for God's sake, Tom Smith, throw down your arms and yield or you'll die." "Who must we yield to? Where are they?" said Smith. "Here they are," said he. "Here are Captain and 50 men with him. They have been hunting you for 2 hours. The boatswain is killed. Will Fry is wounded, and I am a prisoner, and if you do not yield, you are all lost." Then the captain himself called out, "Smith, you know my voice. If you leave your weapons at once and yield, I will not kill you. I will only kill Will Atkins." And as estimated, Will Atkins started howling. "For God's sake, Captain, only mercy I want. What have I done? I'm equal to all the others." The captain ordered, "Throw out your rifle and surrender, and trust the governor's mercy." The captain meant me, for everyone was calling me as governor. Sending the man who had spoken to him and 2 men more, I had the whole group bind around, and we took the lifeboat. They begged us again and again to spare their lives. The captain replied, "In this event, I can't do anything for you, since you weren't my captives. Took you capture the commander of the island. Maybe the governor will send you to England for your sins. However, he demanded Will Atkins to be prepared. He will be hung tomorrow." He had made up these words, of course. Atkins started begging by kneeling down, and the others which had involved in the rebellion solicited the captain not to be sent to England. I was aware that the survival time was at the door. I called, at a good distance, one of the men to say to the captain, "Captain, the commander calls for you." And presently the captain replied, "Tell His Excellency I am just coming." This perfectly amazed them, and they all believed that the commander was just by, with his 50 men. and as soon as I noticed the captain, I explained the plan which I had made before getting the ship back. The following day we would carry it out. The captain would talk with the mariners and would sound out them. Thus it would be clear themselves whether they were reliable enough or not. The captain talked with the sailors, they started begging, and in a case like this, the captain cheated them by saying, "If you boost us to gain the ship back, I will tell the governor to save you." Under these circumstances, the men accepted this proposal with great happiness. In this turn I ordered again. I think this order was quite logical. "Go near the convicts again and select 5 men among them, and tell them if they don't obey the plan that they had promised, those 5 men will be hung immediately." Now I explain the ones who would be on the way of getting the ship back. First, the captain, his mate and passenger. Second, the 2 prisoners of the first gang, to whom, having their character from the captain, I had given their liberty, and trusted them with arms. Third, the other 2 that I had kept till now in my bower, but on the captain's motion had now released. Fourth, these 5 released at last, so that there were 12 in all. Besides 5 we kept prisoners in the cave for hostages. Having prepared the lifeboat, they crowded in it, approaching the ship at midnight. The captain ordered Robinson to shout the ones inside. By showing they had caught all of them, and after a quick quarrel, they captured the sailors who were at the deck. The chief of the rebellion had perceived the situation, and had tried to defend himself together with 2 men who had weapons and a child. But without having had mercy for them, the captain fired at him from his head. Eventually, with the support of this state, the others surrendered too. After having got the ship back, the captain fired 7 times, the sign of victory. Any more, I was at the threshold of escaping from the island. This enormous ship could take me wherever I wanted. Then it was the right time to talk the ones having involved in the rebellion. I began as, "I haven't decided what to do. Since the captain isn't in favor of taking you in this ship, consenting to your fate, you will live here. If accept, there is no trouble." Of course, instead of being hung in England, to live on the island was the most attractive thing they would do. Besides, I informed them about the Spanish who had reached the island and ordered to behave the Spanish quite well. Chapter 13. The following day I had got on the ship, taking one of my parrots and the gold I had got from the Spanish ship. I left the island on the December 19th, 1686. That's that. I had been on the island for 28 years, 2 months, and 18 days. After having a long journey with this ship, I arrived at England on June 11th, 1687. I was back there after 35 years. My dad had died and my mother and the whole family had immigrated to different sides. Only 2 sisters and the son of my brother were left. Already with this money, it was beyond reason to stay there. Thus I moved ahead with a ship to Lisbon to get information about my farm in Brazil. In April, I arrived there together with Friday. Owing to being rather old, the captain had left the sea. He mentioned the disasters about my farmstead had had in time. Of this he had been obliged to spend my money. Anyway, he had rescued me from the vast ocean, and then again he was taking me as mistress. After a time near 7 weeks, I received a big package from the heirs of my agents. In the years having passed, I had earned from the farmstead a lot of money, and eventually I decided to go to England. Thinking in a big anxiety how to go there, the old captain guided me, saying that I ought to have a journey from land. Thus I had set off on the journey with Friday and an English sailor as a servant. I haven't bothered you telling everything having happened in the sea, so I will do the same and won't mention about the happenings in detail. But after all, I must make some events clear too. The journey was too hard, since we had had to cope with the precipitous mountains. Ultimately, we landed Dover on Friday 14th. In return to my vouchers I had brought, I received my money immediately. Of course I had missed my own land too much, and I was determined to stay in my country by selling my farmstead. With this, I earned 3,000 golden coins. The years which were full of adventures were behind the future any more. In this state, everyone supposed me not to go into an adventure again, whereas I had a powerful desire to set off on another journey. Meanwhile, I settled in England and married, having 2 sons and a daughter. But my wife died. Then my cousin persuaded me to go to Western Indian Islands as a merchant in his ship. It was 1694, and best of all, I met my colony on my island and moved toward Brazil then. The English who had involved in the rebellion were in cooperation on the island. Maybe I will continue with all these events, the other fascinating matters, and the adventures.